Um, shall we wait for one more minute for the rest to come? There are 32 participants logged on already. Thank you very much to everybody. Again, I repeat.
Well, just a quick question. Will
yes.
this recording be available for people to watch later if they join in late?
Yes, I've been informed by the technical people in BAC. In fact, on my screen, I can see it's recording.
Yeah.
So I hope to get a copy of it, share it on the relevant YouTube page. And in fact, I will hope to share with the two of you, the two gentlemen, for you to put up on your respective social media for everyone to know.
So maybe later in the call or towards the end, you can remind people that if they missed the beginning, they can check back to a certain place to see the first half that they missed.
Spot on. I agree. All right, everybody. Good afternoon. Welcome to the BAC's webinar, Brickfields Asia College. I am Richard Wee. This is part of the my law firm, Richard Wee Chambers' Impact Seminar. This is the Impact series where we hold a series of webinars to discuss about the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on our economy and our commerce, and of course, the legal issues related to it. For today, we'll kickstart this series. This is the inaugural series. We have a discussion on sports business and the impact. Before we start, I would like to first introduce the speakers. On your screen, I hope you can see the three of us. The gentleman with the headphones is Mr. James White, and the other gentleman is Mr. Julian Jackson. The two gentlemen are the founders and owners of a sports consultancy company called ResultX Asia, and today they are spending some time with us to give their thoughts and views about the impact of COVID-19 on the sports business. And as of 3:02, there are 39 people who has logged on. Thank you very much. Again, before we start, I would like to again record my thanks, our thanks to BAC, to Mr. Rajasingham, Mr. Rajan, Ms. Julie, the technical team behind this who got this all up and running. And I would like to thank everybody who is logged on so far. I will thank all of you again at the end of the show. And then before we start, this is how we plan to do it. I will first set the tone on the discussion. I will allow my two colleagues to share their views, who they are, what they are about, what the aspiration of the company. We will be then setting a hypothetical case for us to study. The hypothetical case will revolve, of course, about sports and business. And then at the end of the session, hopefully at about 3:45, 3:50, we will try to open up the session for Q&A. Some house rules. There is a Q&A button at the end at the bottom of your screen. You click on it and punch in your question. I will go through it. I don't think we can cover all questions, but we'll try. And then you will soon see later the relevant expertise of Mr. James and Mr. Julian in a short while. Then you can post your direct questions to the two of them. Okay? So we've got at 3:03, we've got 43 people logged on already. Again, thank you. Now, so welcome to the inaugural webinar. Can I, before I start off the hypothetical case, can I first invite James, perhaps you would like to, Julian, to start off your introduction on the history of ResultX Asia, how it came about, and then maybe share with us some of your experiences. All yours, Julian.
Certainly, thanks very much. Thank you very much for joining us today. Hopefully you'll find this insightful. James and I have both been in Asia for 25 plus years. So we're actually a lot older than we look, or we like to believe. We've been in Hong Kong, Singapore, Indonesia, Dubai, and now both of us live in Malaysia, where we've both been for a fairly sizable amount of time. I personally have been working for broadcasters, traditional and OTT, for internet companies, tech companies, rights trading companies. We've represented federations, we've acquired content, created content, as well as doing branded content with various companies and brands. And most recently, I've been in the esports business. The type of content that I've been working with over the years include WWE, WWE wrestling, that is, major football rights, including the EPL, the Spanish and Italian national teams, the French League, BWF badminton, ITTF table tennis, combat sports, HBO boxing, pretty much a huge array of sports we've dealt with, as well as cricket when I was doing some event organizing. And I guess earlier this year, James and I, James will tell you a little bit about himself in a second, we had a conversation where we were both talking about how we really need to be doing what we do for ourselves. And it just so happened timing worked out very nicely, or at least at that time it felt like it worked out very nicely, that we should start a business together, which is what we did. And then of course, COVID-19 hit the fan.
What a timing, isn't it? Yeah.
Correct.
So that's interesting. So basically, from what I understand, you are into your expertise are basically around content of sports media,
Correct.
Media, issues pertaining to broadcast, etc.
100%.
Right?
Yeah. So I'm the content guy. I'm the English content guy, and down here or there, whichever way you're looking at our pictures, that James is the commercial sponsorship guy and events guy.
James, all yours. Yeah. Why don't you share with us what kind of areas you're doing? Maybe share with people. At least they get to know who you are.
Sure. Thanks, Richard. Julian, as a good partner of mine, has teed me up very well here. I've been, as Julian has, I've been in Asia since 1992. I lived 11 years in Indonesia, so boleh cakap bahasa Melayu bila nak. And I've been here in Malaysia for 12 years, and I also in between spent 5 years in Singapore. So I've lived around the ASEAN region. I've worked most of that time with IMG, which is one of the world's largest sports marketing companies. Julian and I met when we worked here in Malaysia for a company called TSA, Total Sports Asia. And most recently, I was selling the global sponsorship rights for FIBA, the basketball federation, here across Asia. So from my perspective, I view things more from a business development, creating events, selling sponsorship, bringing value to these. So I'm more I guess the show me the money kind of guy in terms of brands, and also how to build things from scratch. So Julian and I are here to combine our skills to work with rights holders, brands, athletes, individuals, to help you to unlock that value that you are not currently realizing. So the X in ResultX Asia stands for that X factor that you may be searching for but can't find right now. So we're here to help come and help you find what that X factor is to drive business forward and generate results.
Interesting name, ResultX Asia. Very interesting. Yeah. So all right, fantastic. So we know who our speakers are. Just for those. Just for a wee bit, in case you don't know who we are, I'm Richard Wee from the firm of Richard Wee Chambers. We're a law firm in PJ, and we usually hold events such as this. You can check us out on our website or Facebook. Just Google for Richard Wee Chambers. Okay, enough about me. Can I start off this? So the basis of our discussion revolves around a hypothetical case of a sports company. So this sports company, Julian and James, both let's call it the J and J, the JJ pair. They run a sports league, an ongoing sports league. The tournament is already midway through. They have a audience of about media audience on both online and TV audience. In total, about 1 million people on a weekly basis watch this particular sports. We're not going to name the sports. And you are also, and this company, other than running the league, also deals with the sponsorship and basically the investment of the league and in the teams and the fans, etc., etc. So using this company, let's call it company X, let's say. So using this company X as an example, how would Julian, dealing now that with this COVID-19, the league has stopped like everywhere in the world. Yesterday, Wimbledon just announced that they have cancelled the tennis tournament. How would you deal with this suspension of the league or cancellation of the league or postponement of the league with regards to the issue of the media, the impact on media and broadcast?
Okay.
All yours.
So I think obviously what's very obvious is the live is not so relevant anymore. particularly during this timing. Obviously, live sport was the be-all and end-all in the sports world. Everything needs to be live. But right now, there is nothing live. So what's really, really important, I think, is to develop a deep fan relationship. Really, what you can't do is go away. If you haven't got any live sport to show people, you need to develop a fan relationship. You need to be creative. If you have a production capability, it's very, very important to make sure that you're producing content in this time. And you don't have to be sophisticated. That's the great thing about the world that we live in today. When I was growing up in the television business, the better quality television was the most important side. You need to put all your money inside the broadcast. Now you can have a phone in your front room and create content that's just as compelling. Today's generation of Gen Z and millennials, they don't necessarily need the top quality production standards. So having a production capability, being able to produce content regularly, you need to release your archive. If you have content, if you have content that is, that's gone in the past, normally you try to monetize that. This time, give it out for free. And we've seen that with a lot of rights holders. FIFA are now giving their content out. The French League are giving their content out to their current broadcasters, as well as on their social media. So you're giving your fans at least something to watch. Okay, it's not live, but it's content that is relevant to them. Use your players. Get them to record personal stories. Get them to do fitness routines. The one thing that, funny enough, the club that we both support, Rick, Everton, they've done a great thing with the managers and the players where they're calling up fans during the lockdown and just, talking to them, shooting the breeze. And that's the sort of thing that, goes viral. People are like, wow, that's so cool to have Carlo Ancelotti, who's the manager of Everton, talking to some everyday fan.
Yeah, it's making a phone call, isn't it? Fantastic.
Correct. Yeah. And this is creating stories, it's creating personality, it's creating content, and it's creating, filling the void of the lack of live. You can do interactions through quizzes, through gamification, lots of different sort of ways of talking to your fans. You need to dominate the social media conversation.
Yeah,
have content out every few hours, even if it's only for a short period of time, a short piece of content. Certainly, the world that we live in today, we have, when I was growing up, it was like everyone was talking about the MTV generation where there was not a lot of length of attention span. Now it's even less with the ensuing generation. So that's really important.
Yeah. So very good views, Julian. In fact, in short, because our topic is about the impact on sports business. So basically, one of your comments is, I like the word, releasing your archive, for example, and creating new contents like what the way Everton is doing. They're contacting their fans, they're calling out the supporters, blah, blah, blah. That's something interesting for us to take into account. Very good. We'll come back to that.
Sure.
Anything else you want to say, Julian?
Just one more thing. I think one thing that I think La Liga has done and done very well, and I think they got over 1 million consecutive views, was create or basically partner with the online video game version of their sport. And so they got the players to play FIFA 20, which is the video game from EA Sports. So they did a partnership with EA Sports, with Santander Bank and La Liga, and they got players to play. And that created live content that broadcasters add.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about this, I think, a little bit later about esports, but I think that's very, very important. It's that live virtual content and embracing your online gaming counterpart and not seeing it as a competitor, seeing it as a part of your content.
You should embrace it instead of making it a rival. I agree. In fact, I think even locally, the Malaysian Football League is also looking at that. Yep. Yeah. And then, so even on from a legal point of view, I mean, I'm a lawyer here, so let me just add one liner. For the impact on media, I think the obvious problem is actually to go through the contracts, and parties are seeing whether there's a force majeure clauses and whether there are ways to review the contract. So, okay, we'll come back to
some information about that a bit later.
A bit later, yeah. So hopefully we can zoom through it. And then, of course, in this, our company X, who's running the league, the sports league, and the By the way, we have 52 people who's logged on so far. Thank you very much to all 52 of you. I'm Richard Wee, for those who are new, and then the gentleman with the headphone is James, and the one who just spoke is Mr. Julian Jackson. Okay, James, this next issue is, I would like to just get your view on this. Now, with this suspension of this league for this Sports Company Acts, this sports league has been suspended, maybe even cancelled. How will this impact on sponsors? And maybe you can also speak about the financial impact of this on the clubs and association and even the athletes. So I repeat, impact on sponsors, the impact on the athletes, the clubs, and maybe the associations involved. All yours, James.
Sure. Well, I think this is really quite an epic situation that we're going through right now, something that nobody on this planet has ever experienced. So we just like to reiterate the fact that we don't have all the answers today. We're just giving our opinions about how things could happen as we sit here today. So we hope that this this situation resolves itself as soon as possible, and I hope everyone stays safe out there. But with regard to our situation, we need to, as Julian said, we need to retain our fan base. We need to remind our fans why they love us. Why was it that they became fans with us in the first place? And that same argument will hopefully pull in new fans during this period, because people are sitting at home looking for things to do digitally. And if they come across some of what we're doing digitally, they might also be pulled in and become new fans of our league or our team as we move forward beyond this situation. So, as Julian mentioned, the historic moments, showing greatest plays, asking questions about the future. How will our team or how will our league bounce back from this? Give us your opinions. Just engaging people digitally. At this point, our digital team will be on fire. Even though our traditional production team might not be as busy, our digital guys are going to be absolutely on fire, and you'd probably be moving people over, or actually amping up on our digital space right now to push out all the content that Julian had just mentioned, because now is the time to really engage. And in fact, that's what sponsors always want. Sponsors actually just sponsor to have engagement. They want to engage with the consumers. So right now is a great opportunity through digital marketing to engage, and through using our content as an engagement vehicle. So linking sponsors to these engagements, as you mentioned with Santander and La Liga, together with the players playing FIFA. I mean, that is, as we push out this content, each piece of it needs to be linked with a partner that we have, a sponsor that we have, and it's relevant to perhaps the sponsor's own area of business. So we link our sponsors to these bits and pieces of content.
Yeah, sorry, James. Just something to add on for you to consider. Maybe Julian can jump in here. With the tournament being the league that Sports Company X is doing, the league is suspended, maybe cancelled. Do you think the sponsors will come knocking at your door and say, "Look, dude, I don't want to sponsor anymore. The league didn't finish. I agreed to pay you per game, per match. There's another 10 more games not played. The league has no finality." What do you think the sponsors will do? And as people running the league and the tournament, what would your reaction be? I mean, other than calling a lawyer, but what would your reaction be?
Well, the first reaction is to understand the situation of the sponsor. So I think you would, if you know your sponsor well enough, you'll get the feeling if they're going to come to you before they do. So if you understand how this situation is impacting their business, you need to think about how they might be able to respond to that, and how you would respond if they come to you. So if their business is really being torn apart, you need to be very, very flexible with them, and you need to think long term. How can you, perhaps if this year is difficult for them, can you add on an additional year towards the back end of your agreement to replace some of the losses that they're
review,
and also to give them
Yeah.
more time to come back, and give them some ease on the fees that they need to give you. But if you're a league that needs cash now, you're going to need to find a different solution that allows for them to continue paying and give them breaks in other ways, or add value, perhaps add more to their package to keep them in. So I think flexibility is the key right now for everyone. All parties will have to be flexible in order to continue to work together. And I think no one wants to actually get the lawyers involved from a lawsuit perspective, from a mediation and negotiation perspective, of course. But I think understanding your sponsor, knowing where they are and knowing how their business is running, so that you can come up with a viable solution to help them to move forward together with you.
From a broadcaster perspective, from a broadcaster perspective, what's really key, and I think I've seen this happen in previous jobs that I've worked in, when you haven't been able to deliver content for whatever reason. So you look at major sports that have got huge broadcast contracts. You've got to talk to your broadcaster early, and you've got to talk off to them and talk about you're in this together. They're hurting, you're hurting, everyone's hurting. So you need to be part of the conversation with them. Don't hide from them, and talk about how you can fulfill the current contract. Right now, if you haven't got any games to play, or you can't play games, and there's obviously a lot of logistical issues. Can you play behind closed doors? You can use virtual crowds for the broadcaster. And I think this is what you might see the Premier League do, or some of the bigger leagues that can afford to do this, is play in an isolated stadium that is using virtual crowds. So at least for the broadcasters, they're getting the content, because they're basically paying for the league. It's not really the sponsors that are paying for for things like the Premier League. It's actually the media rights. It's the broadcasters. So it's providing extra content. It's extending contracts. It's finding ways to play this in a safe environment, which obviously is very, very important right now, because people don't want to be turning up to big mass participation events, because they don't want to get.
I agree. Yeah. In fact, for there are 55 people who logged on already so far. Thank you very much. Just for those who logged on, I know we have received questions from our law firm is received, because we do serve on sports work. Some clients ask us, Richard, why does the Premier League still want to go on? They should just cancel because of COVID-19.
It cannot not do it, to be perfectly honest. If they do, if they cancel the season, and this is why, as an Everton fan, I'd be more than happy to cancel the season so Liverpool don't win the championship. But the point is, the Premier League can't afford to. The clubs can't afford to. They have to find a way to provide value to their broadcasters, because if they don't, broadcasters are going to be suing left, right, and centre, and they won't be able to pay players. They won't be able to play, everything else. It's a very, very difficult situation for particularly the Premier League clubs. Other sports that are maybe that can afford to cancel events, that's fine, because maybe the revenues from rights fees are not that high. But for the Premier League and for, I guess, the NFL and NBA and all of the other major sports around the world, they need to have these games. And how they do that, they're going to have to get creative and maybe use AI technology.
Yeah. Well, James, in US, before the Premier League was suspended, NBA suspended their league. They're the first to suspend, the first major league to suspend. If Company X was dealing with the NBA, such a huge tournament, a few 100 million people following the show, how do you think the things will pan out? I mean, do you think the league, if they cancel the NBA, there'll be a financial meltdown?
Well, I think firstly, you have to view things in the world view. We need to act responsibly, given this COVID-19 situation that we're facing. If the teams keep pushing to play, or the leagues push the teams and players to play, and then that actually encourages the spread of the virus, I think that's irresponsible, and history will view them as being irresponsible forever. So I think caution is certainly key, and when Rudy Gobert was joking about COVID virus, and then later that same day after the game, he was tested positive for it.
I remember
that was an alarm bell, and I feel that the NBA responded properly by promptly shutting down the league and stopping games. I think you don't want to risk a player's health. I think no one is going to start playing with no fans, we're not going to start playing again until we see a reasonable reduction in the spread of this disease. So I think, we need to really think about there's going to be, people should be getting ready for quite a long break. And that's why all this other types of content that Julian is talking about is important. But that's the first thing that you need to think about. Then all the other elements in terms of revenue generation, in terms of losses, etc. Everyone else is in the same basket in that regard. And whoever gets more creative digitally, I think at this point right now, is going to be coming out of this on the other end in a much stronger position.
But yes, Julian, sorry, I was about to ask both of you something else. You want to say something?
Just very briefly, just what you're going to see is there's going to be a number of sports that will need government help. There's no two ways about that. Certainly some of the poorer performing sports are going to need government help. You're going to see transfer fees, certainly, and big wages being paid to players from various sports. They're going to be really depressed. They're going to be. You're also going to find anything below the top teams. If you're looking at football, if you use football as an example, the top teams, the numbers are going to go down, but they're going to survive. They're going to be fine. They have huge revenue bases. It's the tier 2 and below teams. Anyone below, if you look in something like the Premier League or the NBA or the NFL, anything below the mid-table teams, they're going to struggle. And we will see more clubs go under. We will see more clubs struggle. We're going to see clubs defaulting on paying their players. You're going to find lots of issues going forward because some clubs who maybe are in the lower reaches of divisions and what have you, they've managed their cash very well, their cash reserves, and they have it. But as we've seen just recently, clubs going bust in the UK. We're going to see a lot more of that. It's not just sport; it's everything. Businesses that are going to go under.
When I went through the history of, I would like to go on later on to speak about fans, fan engagement. But just before we go to the next topic about fan engagement, just to wrap this issue of financial impact on associations, sports, clubs, and players, there are two incidents which comes to my mind when it comes to a suspension of a sports tournament. The Egyptian, they had in 2012, the Egyptian Football League was stopped because of civil unrest, and the whole league was suspended and eventually cancelled. So that's one way we could look at it. They had to redo the whole league, and that was because there was a big civil unrest there. But another incident we can look at is during the financial crisis of 1997. In 1998, I remember reading that the US dollar became too expensive. Many currencies around the world collapsed. As a Malaysian, I recall 1 ringgit was equivalent to 8 pounds or 9 pounds of British pounds, and the US dollars was sky high. Do you guys have any experience from the time? I mean, I'm effectively aging you guys from 97, 98, but because you told me you've been around for 20 over years. So 97, 98, I'm quite sure the two of you would have been involved in sports already. Anything to share? Maybe there's anything we can borrow from the experience to use for current situation. James?
Sure. I was in Indonesia back then working with IMG, and we had, in 1997, we had 5 world-class level badminton events in Indonesia. All of them top level events. In 1998, we had 1. So we obviously US dollar prize money was an issue. The good thing was that the BWF worked with us because it wasn't only Indonesia, and I was working regionally with the BWF across Asia for badminton events in Malaysia, Thailand, all markets that were hit. So the BWF was very flexible in terms of reducing the minimum amount for prize money for its top tier events. So I think during that period, the focus was let's regroup. Some events are going to have to go away. Some activities will have to go away, but just do what you can. Find out who's still willing and able to continue to work with you. put that all in a basket and figure out what you can do with it. And I think that's what we did. We only had one event. We had football, basketball leagues, other things happening. 5 badminton events in '97. That went reduced to one event, one badminton event only. And moving forward, though, the football league in Indonesia had been disbanded because there was no money. Dunhill left, and all the teams were going bankrupt. But by 2000, once we saw a very depressed 98, 99 came back a little bit, but by 2000, everything was back on track and everything had been readjusted. So maybe not exactly.
Yeah.
Adjustments, financial adjustments need to be made, but the economy had started moving again, and because you helped people out during that downtime, you reduced fees, you reduced the length of a season, the number of events, but you just did something. Get out in the market and do something. So once it's safe to figure out who is able and willing, and do something with them. So even if it's the MFL or other activities that you as sponsors or leagues are undertaking, if right now is not the right time, just maintain those relationships with your clients and fans, and then at the right time, find out what you have and how much time you have to do it, and just start doing something. I think that was the message that I learned from 22 years ago.
Yeah, good experience, isn't it? Julian, you want to add anything to that? Hello, Julian?
Oh no. I think he's mesmerized. He's mesmerized by the financial loss of 1998.
Okay.
I'm sure
we'll come back to Julian. Yeah. So on the point I heard you say just now, James, on the issue of the fan engagement. With this COVID-19 impact, by the way, before I proceed, we have 50 over people participant. Thank you. We have 2 questions so far on record. Any of you would like to ask any Q&A at the bottom of the screen, type in your Q&A. We're going to start coming into some Q&A later. We're having some unfortunate internet issues with Julian, but the show goes on. James and I will just continue first. Sometimes it happens with the internet. Now, so James, with regards to the fan engagement and the impact of this COVID-19, let's not forget about the heartbeat of sports. While we all cheer on Usain Bolt, and in Malaysia, Lee Chong Wei, or even we won the mixed doubles badminton pair of Goy Dewing and her partner to win. We won our players to win, but it's always the supporters. It's the heartbeat of the sports. What do you think will be the impact of this COVID-19 on the issues of supporters and fans?
Well, I think Julian touched on it earlier. Showing that the teams and leagues care about the fans, showing that teams and leagues understand that fans are going through the difficulty they're going through right now. Because I think we see a lot of welcome back, Julian.
Julian, your microphone. Yeah.
I think we see a lot of teams and leagues undertaking CSR activities right now, showing how much they care about the community that supports them and care about their fans. And I think those, if you are a team or a league right now and you're involved in this webinar, think about how you can show how you're giving back to the community, because that's the community that supports you moving forward. And that's one really big way to show that, hey, look, we're thinking about you fans right now, about your welfare, about your safety. And, we want you to be well and stay well so that you can come back and we can all celebrate future victories. But I think that's a very important piece to remind them that you are also human and you remember that they are human. So start from there. And then build, I think, with a lot of the tools that Julian and I have mentioned during this down period, but maintaining that relationship. But I think right now, the number one message is show them you care about them and their health and their families.
Yeah, I think so. I think at the moment, many people underestimate the escapism of sports. People look at sports as a way to escape reality sometimes. But actually, it's also a sense of joy, loyalty, and support. But with sports not going on, we really need to learn to engage supporters, isn't it? Julian, you want to add anything to this point about the impact of the pandemic on supporters and what we can do. In fact, you did mention a little bit earlier about what Everton was doing. You wanted to add some more, all yours?
Yeah, I suppose a little bit was when everything comes back, right? When you look at what happens after the pandemic has hopefully blown over at a certain point in time, people are not going to want to attend events the way that they used to. I know personally that, you know, I've got into a routine of cleaning my hands and, you know, being scared of, you know, getting close to anybody, you know, if I go to the supermarket. So you're going to find that, you know, even though supposedly the danger is over, people are not going to be going to events the way they used to, at least in the short term. Hopefully over a period of time, it will dissipate. But in the short term, you're going to find people not wanting to go to events. So you've got to find a way to monetize that fan. So they may still be interested. How do you do that? Do you do it on pay-per-view? Do you do it more VOD content? So you need to also make up for the fact that they're not turning up by getting more money out of, or at least more revenue out of the fans that do turn up. And how do you do that? You make them more immersed into the sport. You know, provide them more immersive and engaging tools, which you can charge for. Get them into the stadiums earlier, that type of thing. But the way fans are going to interact with sport is going to be very, very different, I think, going forward.
Well, I actually, on another note, I'm going to slightly turn the situation a bit of 180 degrees. One situation that legally has not been handled with about sports and fans, particularly about tickets that has been sold, where I now would like to go a little bit to Olympics, and for many of the major leagues around the world. So this company, our fictitious SportX company, we have to deal with this, is about season tickets. You know, what are we going to do with season tickets? You know, I suppose from a legal point of view, I can say that actually the supporters have a right to ask for a refund. Could be paid to watch, say, 20 home games, and including other league tournaments. Or if you are an NBA supporter, you pay to watch.
Been used else.
So can they get money back? That will be an issue, you know.
I think what will happen is you'll see a lot of the clubs saying, okay, you can have the first X, you know, 9, say if it's Premier League, there's 9 games still to go. You can have the first 9 games for the next season, and extending contracts.
Yeah, I think they should do that. Of course, at the moment, I can't imagine any fans suing any club anywhere in Europe or in the world. I think we're all fighting for our life, but it's something we have to consider in the future. You know, do you agree with that, James?
I think if your event continues, if it's a league and you have more games coming up, but if it's something like the French Open, or, you know, if it's an event that, well, if it happens annually, obviously that's something again. But if it's a one-off event, then there's no choice but to refund. If it's a concert or something like this, you need to refund, and you know, maintain that good relationship. It might be a pain in the rear, but if it's a one-off event and you're just going to miss it and you can't postpone it, got to refund and maintain that good reputation, so that when you do come back with that event, they trust you and they'll buy with you again.
Yeah, I agree. It sounds very sensible approach. So on that point, we'll move to another topic before we start going towards the addressing Q&A. We've got some really interesting questions we have here. Thank you very much for the questions so far. You know, now that all of us are forced to stay home, and Julian touched a little bit about that earlier about the Spanish League, you know, everybody's forced to stay home. And then I recall when we were doing esports, my firm was heavily involved in esports. I always get questioned, what is that? You know, it's not real sports, and, you know, people stay home. And then suddenly now everyone's looking at esports. You know, do you think this impact on this tournament? So dealing with, again, our fictitious company X, who's running that sports league, would that would a turn towards esports be something companies in sports running leagues should do? Julian?
I think there's a couple of angles to this. One is you look at esports and the rise of esports, a lot of it came through the live events. So actually esports companies are struggling because they haven't got any live events, and it's all, there's not as much money in esports when it's just online only. That obviously will probably try and be changed, but where a lot of the major money was coming from was the major live events, which, like every live event, is struggling right now. So that was the first catalyst of the rise in popularity of esports. Maybe COVID-19 could be the second catalyst of the rise of popularity, because of the fact that obviously you don't need the social gathering, and brands are looking for new areas to invest their money in. But also that the actual the current sports that are struggling at the moment need to embrace esports a lot more than they do. I mean, they actually do it a lot more in Europe and America. In Asia, there's very little sporting esports, football, NBA, basketball, or even badminton, or whatever the sports may be. You're not seeing as much esport around those particular style of games. I think we may see a little bit more of that, and I think the traditional sports need to embrace their esports side of the business. I tell you who do it very well is obviously the motorsports arena, and we had the Formula One having a virtual Formula One Grand Prix with many of the drivers, and they could actually have the interactivity of fans playing or racing against the real drivers, which I think is great. So what we'll see, I think, going forward is sports embracing esports more. The traditionalists are saying, oh no, esports is not sport. We'll start to realize that actually we need to be part of this and not against it. And there's a famous quote from the CEO of Liverpool, of all people, Peter Moore, said that at I think it was a conference, he said that his son he used to have the experience of taking his son to the match, but his grandson will probably be the first generation that doesn't go to the match the way that his son and he did. It was something that was a rites of passage to go to the match. His grandson doesn't necessarily want to do that anymore. He'll be playing Fortnite. He'll be playing
Dota 2.
Dota 2, exactly. Any of the major games. So Peter Moore, the CEO of Liverpool, said, if I'm not talking to that fan, I'm dead. So the clubs, the sports, they need to embrace it. They need to be part of the conversation. They need to stay relevant. And so they should look at esports as complementary, embrace it, bring it on board. Don't see it as a competitor, because if they do, they're going to struggle to attract the younger audience. And you look at the Olympics, and you look at certainly the Asian Games and the SEA Games where it's been in recently, that esports has been in. They've realized straight away that if we don't talk to the youth,
then we're going to lose them.
Olympics are a little bit more sticky in the mud about it, but eventually they will come around and realize that if they don't embrace it, they're in trouble. So I think esports, it will go through a second catalyst for the success. Currently, it's actually still very niche. I mean, it's huge numbers, but still very niche in comparison to major other sports. I think once it's a little easier for people to understand, the programming is a little bit easier to understand. Start producing programming that's a little bit more personality based. We'll see a much bigger increase in the popularity of esports.
Okay. Good point. So clearly we can see there's a role for esports. James, you want to add something on in there before we go towards the issue of Olympics?
Just quickly with esports, I think if we see sports on the pitch suffering, we're going to see esports that are related to that sport suffering. So I mean, the focus for people who are interested in football, if we don't have people playing football, there's going to be less people interested in playing a game about football. So I think esports is moving very quickly in the non-sports types of games. So we need to have a great on-court or on-pitch product to keep people interested in those mirror esport games, like a FIFA game or a NBA 2K. So the product on the court is directly related to the esport correlated game. So I think that's important for us to keep a good product on the ground.
Okay, we've got another 15 minutes left. I'm quite sure we can extend. We've got lots of questions coming in now. And I'm going to go into Olympics and actually address a few questions. A few of our delegates who logged on, thank you very much for 50 people who logged on, have asked questions about the Olympics. And as we all know, the Olympics has been postponed to 2021. The new date is in July 2021. So I'll do two in one. We'll talk about the Olympics and address a question at the same time. We have a few questions from Jason Chai, Glenn Stidoff, who did mention about COVID-19, but he was speaking more about the habits of the public and also about esports. What do you see the impact of this COVID-19 on the financial impact on the on Japan itself? You know, not the game, but the nation of Japan. Now that the Olympics has been postponed, this is Jason's question. Good question by Jason. What do you think is going to be the financial impact? Imagine putting yourself, because you know your company X, you're running a league. There's a country, host country, running it with you. Now the whole tournament has been taken away, something the size of Olympics. What would you say to that, James?
I think if you were to cancel the Olympics, it would be catastrophic, and that's where you would need a lot of lawyers like yourself and a lot of insurance companies to get involved and try to untangle who's responsible for what. But that's why they postponed it, because I mean, Japan has invested, the whole society, the whole country has invested in infrastructure, has invested in training, invested in all these different areas, and they've sold the hospitality, they've sold the tickets, all these elements are already sold. So to postpone it, you can then just move those commitments. But if you canceled it, it would be catastrophic. So I think it was a good move to postpone it. Some sports through their qualification process yet, which is good. Those who have already qualified, those guys might have to requalify, but I think that's a minor issue as opposed to the effect that Japan would have faced had they canceled it. So I think I'm glad that they postponed it. Most commitments can just be moved, and as long as this virus situation resolves itself over the next 6 months, then that can be maintained. If they do have to cancel, a total catastrophe. Billions.
Just to add to that, I read, funnily enough, just yesterday, a report, and I wrote it down, that if there was a cancellation, there would be, it would cost Japan about $3 billion. In TV rights alone, it's $2 billion, with 600 million lost through hospitality. And Swiss reinsurance are already 250 million in the hole because of it. The actual postponement. So they're huge numbers. And
huge
I think
numbers
there was another thing we're saying, that overall, Japan, not including the Olympics, but also the knock-on of business, it would be a loss of around $6 billion. That's just because of the Olympics.
Interesting.
I think this is a reminder to all of us. When we have events, we think about event insurance. And a lot of times people think of public liability as their obligation, but in fact, you have so many more relationships that you're liable for under this. So if you're an event operator, or if you're a sponsor or a brand who owns events, please do think about event insurance that covers not only public liability, but also covers all the outlay of cash and the potential profits and your third parties who are also spending money on your event in the instance that you need to cancel. And that's
totally
an important
agree.
piece.
Insurance is crucial. I totally agree. In our work, in the legal work, we always advise the clients that. Totally agree with you on that. Glenn Stidoff, I hope I pronounced his name correctly. Please forgive me if I didn't pronounce it correctly. Glenn asked a very, very interesting question. He says that, look, the COVID-19 has closed almost everything down. The year is supposed to be the year for Olympics and Paralympics. Even some Newcastle fans dreaming to a trip for Wembley, mentioned here. Now, the new normal is that we stay home. And the underlying concern is that the social distancing may, in fact, distance casual supporters to sports. So his question, he asks that, perhaps Julian may want to tackle first, or I leave it to the two of you. How do sports lure back the casual and corporate fans who are not necessarily diehard fans after this? So what must we do to maintain them, and how do we lure them back after this? I think it's a good question. Who wants to take a first bite? James? Julian?
Julian, why don't you go ahead?
Okay.
Julian, all yours.
I was thinking, funnily enough, fairly recently about this. how are you going to bring the fans back into the stadium, given that we've already got these habits that we've created? There's ways of looking at, changing how you have seating in stadiums. Maybe it's a fan, empty seat, fan, empty seat, fan, empty seat. Maybe there's that type of thing. Having a lot of places where people can wash their hands and use soap and water.
All right.
But looking at, taking into consideration people's concerns, because I know personally I have those concerns. So I think it's going to be very, very difficult. It's not going to be an overnight fix. There's going to be half-empty stadiums where, a year ago they were full stadiums. 50% of people are going to say, I'm going to go to the match anyway. I really want to go. 50% of people, I'm not going to put myself at risk. So, there's lots of areas where the clubs are going to have to work really hard. They're going to have to use this lull in live sport to work out what their strategy is going to be. Are they going to build a whole new business outside of their attendance business? How do they deliver their content? How do they deliver what they do? I mean, if I had the answer, I think I'd probably be a lot richer than I am. So it's a tough one. I'll be honest with you. It's a very tough one.
Well,
James?
I'm sorry, I misunderstood the question. I thought it was really more about engaging fans digitally as well. So that's why I threw it to you, Julian. Sorry. So if the question is more about how you bring people back into the stadium, then yes, absolutely. The whole event presentation from when you get out of your car until when you get back to your car needs to be thought about by each team or each host venue or host club. And that process needs to be retooled and needs to be explained to season ticket holders, to potential ticket buyers, to the corporate hospitality customers, to explain how you're going to post COVID-19, how you're going to reassure them, as well as how you're going to entertain them. I think because we've become so much more digitized through this process, there must be a lot that they can do during this period to enhance digital experiences at the venue. I know that in the UK, the stadiums, I mean, tell me if I'm wrong, but the stadiums are all they're very basic. Unless you're in the corporate hospitality space, it's just a seat, So there's not a lot of other things happening around. Nothing happens during a football game except for people singing songs, which I'm sure is very exciting. But whereas in an NBA stadium or another place, you've got constant things happening, and yes, there's a lot of starting and stopping, but there's things happening as a fan constantly during those stoppages, and there's a lot of engagement there within the stadium. So I think those new elements need to be reminded,
They have to be
and also the hygiene elements need to be explained to the customers, and that entire process from getting out of the car all the way until you return to your car needs to be rethought.
Well, guys, I wouldn't be surprised if in the future when let's say we purchase season tickets, it'll come with sanitizers. You wouldn't be surprised with that. Yeah. But yeah, I think it's a good question. Most company, in our case, the fictitious company X, will definitely have to think about how to lure fans back after COVID-19. My personal view, I think we may need to, even more than ever, use the TV media and online media to capture the following for now. Right? We'll see how it goes.
Rick, I think there's a really great question that I think Winnie's touched on, as well as...
Yes, I'm going to talk about Winnie. Yeah, Winnie's question is very good. Yeah. So I'm about to come to Winnie's question. Shall we go to that? Yeah. Please. So Winnie, Miss Winnie Chan have asked a question. She's very polite as usual. Good afternoon, gentlemen. She starts. Her question is that with COVID-19 being a force majeure, having impacted sponsorship, I'm sure moving forward it will be tougher for brands to want to sponsor tournaments. Very good point. Now sponsors they are concerned. I'm investing so much money, but if the tournament doesn't go on, what happens to my exposure? So her question is, what would you think would be a clear change in how rights holders and sponsors manage this in the near future? James?
Well, going back to the financial crisis back in '98, we saw a total drop-off of sponsor investment for about a year. But then after that, we saw it return. It returned and over, let's say, a 2 to 3 year period post '98. So there may be some short-term shell shock from the brands, but I think firstly, it depends on how you manage and handle those sponsors. If the sponsors feel like they were treated fairly, even if they have to back out, they will then appreciate that, and they will come in again as soon as they possibly can. But if they were not treated fairly, then you know, the word about that will get around, and it's really almost how you respond in this time with these partners, and not only just the MFL, but also other event managers and event owners, and federations and clubs. How they manage this and handle this with these brands will kind of be the indicator for other brands of how risky it is to get involved with sports.
Julian?
I'll just echo what James says, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah. I think James covered everything. Well done, James. Thank you. In fact, we have we have some question also on that point. A gentleman, Danish, I hope I pronounced your name correctly, inquired if we could elaborate more on the issue of force majeure. He had also earlier on inquired about consumers. A very interesting question, Danish. He asked, if consumer subscribing to sports broadcast channel, the consumer paid for live sports but now can't get any sports. What can they do? You know, what are the rights they have? So from a legal point of view, before I ask the two gentlemen, of course, I think such consumers may have a right. They can take the action in the consumer tribunal, but I'm not very sure whether it can go far. Of course, we have to look at the terms and conditions of your subscription. And then your next legal question you asked here, Danish, you inquired to elaborate more on force majeure issues. Long story short, force majeure is an intervening factor. Classic example is there's World War, or there is some sort of Mother Nature's intervention. But this pandemic, many contracts did not address the issue of a pandemic or epidemic as a force majeure. So many of these contracts may not be able to rely on force majeure. But I suppose once a lawyer receives the contract, they will be able to be creative and find a way out. But the best way is always to try and meet both parties and try to resolve. That is my personal view. Now, so that's the legal part. But despite its legal question, does the two of you would like to attempt the question? One is the issue of claiming back money for subscription for live sports.
Yeah.
Anything? Any comment on that?
I would say that if a broadcaster is wise enough, they would offer before they're asked. This is something that it's not great for them by any stretch of the imagination. This is going to cost them money. But if they're wise enough, they will tell people, okay, we're going to give you 1 month free, or a furlough. You don't have to pay for the next month, but you pay for the following month. That will, you know, create a lot of goodwill. And certainly we've seen it with not just sports, but every brand out there. If you're not doing right by your customers or your staff, people are going to remember when all this is over. So it's very important that you keep the community and your customers on side. So being proactive, I think, is very, very important to us. If they don't, then it could go legal and it will blow up in your face, and it probably costs you an awful lot more if you don't do something like that than if you do.
Yeah, James, all yours, James.
Just to give an example, this is not on the individual level, but I totally agree with Julian in terms of offering first. And even if it's not sports, but offering them an alternative, that's also an option. So let's say we don't have these football games, but we'll give you these movies, or, you know, as a first option to keep them paying.
To replace,
something else to replace it. But for instance, back in '98, again, I'll just go back to the financial crisis. Satelindo, a company in Indonesia, which is now Indosat, but back then they were the title sponsor of the Indonesia Open Golf, and they just basically said we can't run the golf tournament. So we allowed them to cancel that. There was a cancellation clause, but they didn't even want to pay the 10% that they had to pay in the cancellation clause. But because our broadcasters were canceling all of our TV programming that we were selling them, because it was all in US dollars, our other programming, there was a program called Trans World Sport, which was all of a sudden had become available. And one of our partners in the basketball league was happy, a broadcaster, to put that on air and give some TV commercial spaces to Satelindo in order for Satelindo to pay the money to us, which we then shared with the broadcaster. So there are ways to be creative in these,
very creative,
in these downtimes. Think of who your friends are. Think of what your assets are.
Yeah.
Think of how things can be intermingled, so that you can find multiple solutions for individual issues.
I mean, one thing I've seen in over 25 years, and I say that a lot, but I've met a lot of people in the sports business, and guys who I knew were interns, 10, 20 years ago, are now, major players within the industry. So, people remember who's nice to them. People remember who's good to them. So, it's very important that we all help each other out. We're all in this together. We're all in I've heard this 1,000 times, and maybe it's boring a lot of people, but it's true. We are, if we don't work with our sponsors, with our broadcasters, and our fans, and all of the different people in the ecosystem, then we're going to be in trouble. Or whoever's going to, whichever business it is going to be in trouble. So working together and and being fair, that's all you need to be. And you'll be amazed by how people will give you a little bit more rope than you would have done if you'd gone like, okay, this is the situation, deal with it.
Excellent. I like the point. So just nice, perfect. We seem to be on point. It's exactly at 4 p.m. now. At the peak of participants, we had about 50 over people logging on. Thank you very much. Before we come to a conclusion, can I invite James and Julian respectively to give your summarized version? What do you think about, the topic is COVID-19, the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on business, sports business. You give a summary, then we can perhaps then call it a day. I don't think there's any more questions coming in, and we have no time to entertain them. So perhaps I can invite James to give your summary before I invite Julian.
I'm glad you asked him first.
Sure. Well, obviously,
the
COVID-19 virus is a terrible situation, and we're all scrambling answers in many different aspects of our lives. But it's definitely going to be going to hit your organization no matter what it is. Have a long-term plan. Have a 12-month plan just in case things don't start up for another 12 months. So even if they want to start a league, they have to start practice first. It's going to take 4 to 6 weeks for things to for the players to get back in shape and things like that. So hold the fort. The tide will turn. Success is coming. Next season, whatever it is, next event could be the best one that you ever have. Fans could stay away, but I personally feel that people are going to be cooped up and they're going to want to get out and they're going to want to come. And I think that the next season could be the best one that you ever have. And inshallah, if we have the Olympics in July next year, that could be sort of like the best example of how the sports world came together in one place to overcome the COVID-19 virus. And I really hope that a year from now we're celebrating at the Olympics, remembering these bad times, but they're only our memory. So hold the fort. Let's look forward to the Olympics being the thing that reminds us of the best of who we are and the best of how the sports business can be.
Okay. What I'd like to say is, sort of a little bit of echoing what James is saying. I don't know whether you mentioned this earlier about the research about Gen Z and millennials and how they miss live sport. Did you mention that before, James? I did not. Oh, okay. So there was just some research just yesterday that was released about Gen Z and millennials say that they miss live sport the most. So 38% of them said they miss live sport the most over all of the other different things that they miss. And that includes going out safely, socializing again, going to the bars or whatever, whatever people do. So that's a good start. People do miss their sport, and people do want sport. It's not going to come irrelevant overnight. It's never going to become irrelevant. Yes, it's going to change. And I think Glenn in the questions there is in summing up, do you think there'll be more opportunities in the long run?
Opportunities, yeah, good question.
I think there will be more opportunities in the long run, because you're going to see people being more creative. They have to be. If they're not creative now, and if they're not thinking of new ways and different ways to interact with fans and to make money, that's why everyone's doing a lot of these things, as well as the passion for their sports, is if they're not doing those, they'll die. So it's really important that you become creative, use technology. I think we're going to see a lot more use of technology in the engagement of fans within their sports. So, you know, look, there's no two ways about it. This is a terrible situation. Everyone's going through a shocking situation financially, no matter who you are. So it's bad. But
Yeah,
you look at the long term, I think there are much more opportunities than there were before.
I totally agree. Can I mean, I know we can't hear the applause, but can I ask all of you to give you a virtual cyber applause to the two speakers who I think shared much in their views about here. Thank you very much to the two gentlemen. In my view, I thought the two of you were very upfront and very passionate about your issues. You clearly knew your stuff and shared some very interesting points there, especially the transfer sport example, a fantastic example. On my part, as a law firm, and some of you may know, we are quite comfortable with sports law. We notice that there are many sports issues which needs to be dealt with. There are some people in the participants and delegates here are lawyers, so I hope as a lawyer we are out there to be able to help clients like people like Julian and James. They need help from us lawyers also. With that in mind, I repeat, number one, thank you to Julian and James for your time. You could have been anywhere else in your house, but you choose to be in front of the laptop in front of us. And thank you to BAC again for sharing this platform with Richard V. Chambers. Very nice of BAC to share this. There are many plans for coming up. We intend to hold an impact discussion on employment law next week and another impact discussion on tourism and hospitality next week under Richard V. Chambers' impact series. With that in mind, I'd like to end with what our current Richard V. Chambers' current favorite hashtag, which is together we will prevail. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate you turning up.
Yep, thank you. Bye-bye.